September 22, 1944. Sandown Pumping Station, Isle of Wight. The little seaside cottage doesn't smell like tea and scones. It reeks of hot oil and new paint. Under a false shop front, shutters latched, signboard blank, 30 diesel pistons thump in counter rhythm, and a bank of electric centrifugal pumps winds up toward a banshee pitch. Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon, Royal Engineers, wipes condensation from his goggles and glances at the pressure manifold. The needle trembles, then pushes past 50, 60, 90. Outside, the channel is a flat pewter plate. Inside, men stand shoulder to shoulder in the cramped machine hall, shirts stuck to their backs, waiting for the moment when fuel, secret, invisible power, leaves England without a ship. The order is quiet, almost domestic. Bring her to pressure. Valves clack, flow meters stir as somewhere beneath those gray waves, a flexible haze pipeline, the thickness of a man's forearm, has at last taken a breath. After weeks of failure, the line toward liberated Cherbourg is alive. McKinnon leans to the open door and calls down the corridor. "Hold your set steady."
Priority message follows.
The voice that answers comes from a switchboard girl wearing factory-issue ear defenders and a pin-on cap. "Sandown to Cherbourg, do you read?" Packets of static crackle and then a clipped reply, French coastal air dampening every syllable. "Cherbourg receiving, pressure rising." A suppressed cheer ripples through the room. No backslapping, no hats in the air. Just the exhaustion of men who've lived a month of false starts. An anchor fouling the cable, a pipe snarled in a propeller, a barnacle-crusted conundrum refusing to turn. They've pushed and failed and tried again, under a ruse so audacious it sounds like fiction. Camouflaged pump houses behind ice cream parlor facades, pipes paid out from enormous floating drums, all of it planned to feed an army racing east. He takes the long walk, 20 paces, past a wall map pricked with grease pencil. Red arrows thread from the Isle of Wight to the Cotentin Peninsula. Someone has scrawled a name in the bottom margin. BAMBI. It is a child's word for a killer's problem. Petrol, oil, and lubricants, the dull initials POL, are more than mush in a logistics report. They are the bloodstream of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Planners in London have measured it to the ton. 60% of everything the soldiers need by weight is fuel and lube, the heavy, steady tonnage that keeps trucks from becoming lawn ornaments and fighters from becoming gliders. Tanker convoys have served since June, but tankers are both targets and hostages, prisoners to weather, to U-boats still skulking, to mined approaches and smashed Ks. The answer, the War Office decided, must not be a ship at all. It must be a pipeline under the sea. He thinks, as engineers do, in parts and tolerances. Heiss for flexibility, Hartley Anglo-Iranian Siemens, lead cord like a telegraph cable, armored in steel wires and wrapped in tarred jute. Hamel for muscle, Hammock and Ellis's steel tube, stiff as a spine, welded in factory lengths and joined at sea. The stiff pipe can't be coiled in a hold. You wind it on a giant buoyant drum instead. A steel cylinder 60 feet long and 40 across. The Navy calls those drums conundrums, as if naming a riddle solves it. Tow a conundrum with tugs, spin it under power, and a black artery unreels into the deep. If the bottom is smooth and your math is true, it reaches another shore without a single enemy ever seeing it. That is the promise that brought them to this room. It has not been a gentleman's progress. On 12th, as sports 12th August, the first Chase line out of England laid cleanly, 10 hours of good work, until a destroyer's anchor snagged and tore it beyond repair. 2 days later, a second try ended with pipe around a screw, hundreds of man-hours and thousands of pounds of precious lead wasted in the churn. On 27 August, when they swapped a Hamel, the sea answered with barnacles. Tons of rough crust choking the first conundrum's skin so it wouldn't rotate. The crew scraped and cursed. The pipe broke again, 29 miles short. Men slept on concrete in their oil-streaked overalls because it made no sense to wash for failure. Now, finally, the numbers are turning in the right direction. 56,000 imperial gallons per day moving west, measly by the dreams they sketched on the blackboard, glorious by the reality of a line that lives. "Here she comes," says the senior mechanic, eyes on a sight glass as if watching a periscope. The glass clouds, blushes, clears. He flicks a knuckle against it. A bead of gasoline trembles and slides. Out in the yard, a WAF driver pulls up in a lorry that smells of chalk and canvas. The facade of the cottage gives nothing away. Net curtains yellowed by salt air, a tin milk pail by the door. Inside, beneath that domestic lie, a row of Byron Jackson centrifugal pumps keep singing at 1/500 pulmarisitsai while reciprocating diesels thud like sledgehammers. A stoker threads between them with a battered oil can, leaving little comet tails of scent in his wake.
Yes,
Camouflage takes many forms in war. This one is soundproofing and paint. McKinnon feels the floor hum change, subtle, but to him as plain as a siren. The telephone rings again. "Cherbourg confirms flow," the switchboard says, voice bright now. On the far side of the channel, in a battered French port only months removed from German occupation, American truck drivers will fill jerry cans at a tap setback from a shell-spalled quay. British fitters will argue about gasket kits and pressure relief valves. A French harbor policeman will stand with an arm behind his back and watch the hose like it's a cobra. And nobody will see a tanker easing down the fairway because there isn't one. The fuel has arrived without a hull, without a wake, without a riskable crew. It has arrived by deception and design. A runner, boots slick with condensate, brings a clipboard. "Signals from Portsmouth," he says. "Dover command asking for current pressure and projected flow at 2 hours. "Dover?" McKinnon nods. BAMBI is only one half of the plan. The other will be DUMBO, a short, brutal sprint across the Strait of Dover from Dungeness to Boulogne. Just 23 nautical miles of water, but a different game entirely. If BAMBI was a long cable under threat from depth and distance, DUMBO is a narrow crossing with mined beaches, wrecked harbors, and currents that try to fold pipe like paper. Yet the math on the wall says it can pump far more, sooner, when it comes online. They will need it desperately, because the armies moving through France are no longer bound to the hedgerows. Their thirst grows by the hour. For a moment, he lets the numbers fall away and listens. Diesel, electric, voices, the sea beyond the shutters. War has a soundscape, machine, and breath, and this room is an orchestra pit. He thinks of the hands that built it. Arthur Hartley, Anglo-Iranian's chief engineer, who insisted a lead cord cable could carry petrol the way a telegraph carries words, B.J. Ellis and H.A. Warren Hammock, who brawled steel into a flexible line and solved the welding residues that choked the bore. Fitters in Tilbury, who joined 40-foot lengths into miles. Shipwrights who strengthened barges to carry conundrums. The anonymous women who wrapped armoring wires around cable at Siemens. None of them will stand in a square to hear a band on VE Day, but thousands of tanks and thousands of trucks will move because they were right. He signs the log. 1510 hours. Maintain and monitor. No changes without authority. Outside, a gull drifts on the roofline. Inside, a corporal checks the packing on a gland and tightens a nut until the thread sings. Fuel is still only a trickle, 56,000 gallons in 24 hours, like filling a lake with a teacup, but it is predictable. Predictable beats brave. Predictable means you can plan the next convoy route on the far shore, schedule the next fighter sweep, promise an armored regiment its share of go juice before dawn. Predictable means you can treat the channel not as a moat or a hazard, but as a conduit. "We'll give them more tomorrow," McKinnon says, and the corporal nods like a man who already has the spanner in his hand. The channel keeps its secrets. Wind pushes a rim of foam against the shingle. Far below, where a trawler's net might drag, the black pipeline arcs in a lazy catenary and settles on sand and gravel. Every few hundred yards, the bottom changes texture. Every change threatens a scuff, a nick, a place where pressure becomes panic. The line has to cross surf, shelves, and the broken iron of war. It is out there now, a thread between two worlds. England's pumped heart and France's open arteries, bridging not only water, but time. The weeks it took to wrest Cherbourg's port from German hands, the days between now and an October storm that will test everything they've built. For tonight the glass is clear. For tonight the numbers hold. For tonight the cottage breeze and no one outside suspects it is a warship. Get some food, McKinnon tells the watch as he shrugs into his grease-stiff greatcoat. We'll ride the gauges till dawn. He steps into the evening. The doorway's fake bell tinkles as it closes behind him. Over the roofs, the western sky is the color of oxidized copper. Somewhere inland, an express rattles toward London with letters and billets and bad coffee and thermoses. Somewhere in Normandy, a tank battalion quartermaster watches his fuel numbers climb and tells his drivers to sleep with their boots on. The war is still huge and hungry. But for the first time since they rolled the drums to the water's edge, the engineers at Sandown can say they have delivered swiftly, secretly, and on demand without a single hull to risk it. The channel, once a wall, has become a pipe. August the 12th, 1944. Western approaches, English Channel, steel skies, and a 4-knot tide. The cable layer HMS Latimer noses ahead of her escorts while the deck crew stands by with gloved hands and eyes on the catenary. Behind them, the dark coil of a new thing, haze, pipe, a lead cord wire-armored hose as thick as a man's wrist, slides over the sheaves, creaks, and vanishes into gray water. From the bridge, a Royal Navy voice, cool as a metronome. Pay out! Steady! Steady! Far aft, a destroyer leans on the swell. A petty officer mutters to nobody. Pray they keep their hooks up. 10 hours later, the prayer goes unanswered. An escort's anchor kisses the invisible line and rips it like torn sailcloth. The channel takes its first tribute. In the log, it is just an entry. Pipeline damaged beyond repair, but on deck it looks like defeat. A limp, twisted length of cable, seaweed snagged in its armor. They try again 2 days later. HMS Sandcroft makes good time, the weather holds, and the men move with the economy that comes from fresh failure. Then a different calamity. The pipe fouls the propeller of HMS Algerian and the lay is spoiled. On 27th August, the team swaps to the steel-walled Hamel system. Pipe too stiff to coil in a ship's belly, so they mount it on a vast, buoyant drum, a conundrum, and tow the drum while rotating it like a colossal spool. The sea, uncharitable as ever, has spent the summer breeding barnacles on the conundrum's skin, tons of them, so many that the cylinder refuses to turn. When they scrape it and try again, the line breaks 29 nautical miles out. Every mistake is new, all of them are expensive. And yet the crews keep mustering at dawn because the sums are merciless. Fuel is life and tankers are targets. Back at Sandown and Dungeness, the pumping houses are masked as cottages and innocuous sheds. Inside those disguises, banks of diesel reciprocating pumps and 4 hulking Byron Jackson electric centrifugals wait for a connection that holds. To outsiders, the places smell of sea salt and paint. To the men inside, they smell of hot oil and varnish, a perfume of purpose. The camouflage is elaborate. Fake shutters, net curtains, even a sham amusement park in one plan, and the secrecy obsessive. No letter is allowed to bear Petroleum Warfare Department. No driver can receive directions without phoning from a public kiosk. Captain J.F. Hutchings, Royal Navy, holds the operational reins with the sang-froid of a man used to improbable weaponry. He signs off on each lay like a surgeon consenting to another risky operation. The Disney-coded code names feel whimsical. BAMBI for the long reach to Cherbourg, DUMBO for the Dover sprint, but the work is anything but. September 22nd, 1944. McKinnon, grease in his cuffs, salt in his eyebrows. Here's the sentence they've chased for 6 weeks. Cherbourg receiving. Pressure rising. On that day, the newly laid Origin arches across to the Cotentin finally holds and begins delivering about 56,000 imperial gallons per day. A week later, a Hamel line joins it. For a moment, the promise seems fulfilled. 2 arteries buried in sand, whispering power into battered French keys. Someone chalks BAMBI breathes on a slate wall and leaves it there like a prayer. The quartermaster at a U.S. depot near Torleville ticks off jerry cans with a stub of pencil, shakes his head at the neatness of it. Fuel with no tanker, no surf line, no pier. At Sandown, a WAF wireless operator puts her ear to a headset and can just hear the low hiss of flow over the static. "It's like listening to rain," she says. The men smile and for a night sleep. The engineers, though, are not paid to sleep. They want more. The original graphs, the bold wartime curves inked in London, speak of hundreds of thousands of gallons per day. Why build a secret pipeline to trickle? On 3 October, orders come to raise the pressure from about 50 bar to 70 bar to push the throughput toward the plan. McKinnon and Hutchings both know the risks. Hayes, for all its supple grace, depends on couplings made perfect in factories that have worked 3 shifts for a year. Hamel, for all its strength, despises sharp seabed edges and trebles its complaints when stressed. They open the valves by measured degrees. For a few minutes, the gauges sit where they ought to. Then the call from the far shore thins, crackles, dies. Somewhere under the gray, the Hayes coupling fails. Somewhere else, the Hamel meets a knife edge on the ocean floor and the steel yields. In the space of an hour, BAMBI goes from promising to terminal. By 4th October, the long route to Cherbourg is shut down. It has moved only about 935,000 imperial gallons, paltry beside the need, precious beside the nothing they had before. Morale does not collapse, it tightens. That same week, McKinnon finds himself standing on a bare shingle spit at Dungeness, Kent. A place of pebbles and wind, a lighthouse like a sentry, the smell of tar and steam. This is DUMBO's ground, shorter distance, about 23 nautical miles to Boulogne. A shoreline less forgiving, but a route that promises more volume, faster. The charts are different here. Mined beaches, wrecks that can't be moved yet, currents that knife east-west. The decision from Whitehall is clear: persist. Antwerp has opened but lies under the menace of V1 and V2. Rouen and Le Havre can take some coastal tankers, but not enough, not swiftly. A pipeline that cannot be bombed on the surface and cannot roll in a storm is still worth every scar on the budget. DUMBO will not be a consolation prize. It will be the artery. Hutchings shifts his people like chess pieces. Conundrums are scraped clean and refaired. Cable barges Britannic and Oceanic practice picking up ends near the surf line. Army and RAF surveyors resound approaches to Boulogne and find a beach in the outer harbor where a shore connection might live among rubble. In the yard, welders kiss steel to steel in showers of light. The Hamel runs will be joined to soft end sections of haze near the beach to take the scuff and flecks of the surf. On a grease-blotted blackboard, someone writes, "Hamel has Hamel," like a litany, and underlines it twice. McKinnon walks the pumps, palms the casings, listens for anything but smooth. The Byron Jackson rotors turn like steady drums. The diesel banks are ready to thump. The Avonmouth Thames backbone has been feeding these stations for months, waiting to push across at last. Night drill. A tug edges the conundrum into position. The drum turns, paying out black line that disappears into the channel like a magician's ribbon. At the shore end in Boulogne, a party under a tarpaulin works with headlamps shaded, wind flaying their coats. They haul the wet snout of highs across blasted timbers and into a trench cut with picks and profanity. A French docker, hat pulled tight, passes a spanner with the solemnity of a ciborium. "Faites vite," he says. "Hurry." The Germans fought hard for this port. Its rail links are battered but repairable, and if the line can reach Calais by extension, the trains can carry petrol into the continent's ribcage. The Channel has decided to be kind for once. The sea is a soft slap, and the wind is a tired breath. The barometer, for once, is a friend. October 26, 1944. The shout on the wire this time comes from HMS Sancroft in the Dungeness control room. "Boulogne is taking. Flow confirmed." No flourish follows. The team has learned the sea's sense of humor. But in the next days, while they lay line after line, a pattern emerges that doesn't mock them. The DUMBO pipes hold. By December, they have 17 lines in the Dover Strait, 9 3-inch and 2 2-inch Hamel, 4 3-inch and 2 2-inch Hayes, a spiderweb no aircraft can see. Hayes, once a heartbreak, proves quiet in service. Hamel sulks and needs repairs every couple of months, but it works within limits, and the depot's tables begin to look like confidence. The numbers on McKinnon's board finally climb like a staircase, not a fever chart. At Dungeness, the disguise is different. Less cottage, more nothing to see here. A woman in a headscarf pedals past on a bicycle and never wonders why this stretch of coast suddenly smells faintly of paraffin. Inside the pump house, a chalkboard carries a joke. "Dumbo will fly." The joke lands because everyone remembers the weeks when BAMBI didn't. The men still speak of Cherbourg with a wince, but they run their hands across the pump casings like the backs of reliable horses. The quartermaster math, once aspirational, becomes daily bread. Hundreds of thousands of gallons per day, routes through Calais, then into the inland grid toward Antwerp, Eindhoven, the Rhine. The goal the planners drew in red pencil, 1 million imperial gallons in a day, is no longer a fantasy you whisper over tea. It is a line on a board with an arrow pointing to March 1945. McKinnon steps outside at change of watch. The lighthouse sweeps its cold coin of light across shingles, short long short. He thinks of the August wreckage, of barnacles thick as armor and couplings that betrayed them at 70 bar, of anchors like iron teeth. He thinks too of the soldiers waking in wet bivouacs far inland, men who only see fuel as the chalk mark on a jerry can and the cough of a truck engine going from maybe to yes. "Persist," Hutchings had said in the mess one night, voice low, fingers curled around a mug. This is a war in which persistence is a weapon. In the darkness, the conundrum's silhouette rides at its moorings like a strange domestic beast. The Channel is no friend. But for the first time since August, it is not the enemy either. December 17th, 1944. Boulogne, Outer Harbor, France. A rasping wind sweeps the quay and makes the tarpaulins clatter like sails. Sergeant Émile Caron, late of the Free French, braces his boot on a timber and lowers a length of rubber hose toward a row of waiting tank lorries. The first driver, an American with a Red Ball Express shoulder patch, leans out and shouts over the gale, "How long to top me off?" Karen grins, teeth bright in the dark. "As long as a smoke," he says, and nods toward the small hut where a pressure gauge winks behind frosted glass. Inside that hut, a soft drone of pumps comes and goes, not with the tide, but with decisions made across the channel. The pipe they're drinking from is not a ship. It is DUMBO, one of a growing web of lines that never shows itself on the surface and never asks permission from weather. The war to the east has convulsed, news crumpled into the day like a cruel letter. Germans counterattacking in the Ardennes, and everything with wheels is suddenly more precious than gold. Tonight, in sleet that skates along the quay, the hose hisses, and the lorry driver watches his gauge climb. The routine here has already acquired its own ritual. First, a phone call from the signal room at Dungeness, a clipped English voice confirming line pressure and expected throughput for the next 6 hours. Then a walk down the quay to check the soft Hayes shore section where it runs through the surf trench, a place as vulnerable as a wrist. Karen and his crew keep sacks of sawdust and rolls of bandage-like tape at the ready for any weeping gland or overeager coupling. Finally, the valve turn. Slow, slow, and the first thrum in the hose. On good days, there are 2 lines feeding Boulogne, one held as a reserve so an engineer can crawl along the beach trench with a lantern and listen for the faintest change in tone. On better days, there are 3, 4, 5, each with a slightly different song, adding up to the same refrain, more. Across the water, Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon has learned Dungeness by its sensory grammar. The skitter of shingle in a gust, the far rhythm of the lighthouse, the smell of salt-tanged diesel on his cuffs, whether he's been near a sump or not. The pumping hall has stripped out the quaintness and gone blunt. No tea shop disguise, just a clean, purposeful box set back from the dunes. At change of watch, he moves valve to valve, laying a hand on each casing. Byron Jackson's centrifugals sing at their assigned notes. The reciprocating diesels beat time like a patient's heart. A new chalk drawing on the board divides the flow. 3 Hamel X9, 2's Hamel X2, 3 Hayes X4, 2 Hayes X2. 17 lines by year's end is the boast. Keeping them alive is the work. He has learned, too. The pipe's moods, how a Hamel will complain after a storm like a man with a bad knee. How a Hayes will take insult without a word, provided you treat its couplings like crystal. Inland from Boulogne, the map is changing color. Where bomb-glazed rail yards once sat useless, temporary spurs now accept pole tank wagons. Truck parks at Davray and Guines fill and empty in tides that have nothing to do with the moon. The Red Ball Express, still hauling, still grinding gears through blown-out towns, begins to stage from depots that exist because DUMBO keeps whispering fuel into the coast, whatever the barometer says. Nobody mistakes the pipeline for a panacea. Tankers still arrive when seas allow. Trains still move their gleaming snakes of black wagons east. But the commanders begin to plan on a floor of supply that cannot be sunk or bombed in the open, and that changes the verbs in their orders, from if to when. On Christmas Eve, McKinnon stands with Commander J.F. Hutchings on the shingle and watches a conundrum ease back from a lay. The drum looks, in the half-light, like a carnival contraption, absurd and homely at once. Hutchings pulls at his scarf and says without preface, "If the straits hold, we will make our million." McKinnon nods, not because the number is mystical, but because it is mechanical. 1,000,000 imperial gallons in a day means 1,000 little obediences. Filters cleaned, relief valves seated, joints greased, ends anchored. Shore boosters timed so the pressure curve lies just under the line where mischief starts. It means swapping in a new Hamel run before the old one turns sulky and making the case to Whitehall that the scrap is worth the steel. It means, too, that a waff at the switchboard never misses the tremor in a signal that says a gland somewhere has begun to weep. The winter goes from gray to iron. January brings gales that blow water flat and then raise it into clenched fists. 2 lines trip out in a single night, one from a seabed scour that undercut a section and let it sag onto a wreck's jagged rib, the other from an overeager increase in pressure when a booster station came on too briskly. The next morning, the pump hall has the air of a surgery after a long fight. Rags in bins, coffee gone cold, the engineers' faces a shade paler than the day. They strip and remake a section, winch and weld in the spray, and by midnight the gauge climbs again. That is the part no communique says. The stubbornness that lives not in speeches but in gaskets, shims, and spanners. East, the war heaves. Bridges go up across the Roer, and then the Rhine is traced in big arrows on the wall maps. McKinnon reads the sit-reps the way a miller reads weather, by how they will load his stones. If the Army must push hard in March 1945, then February must be the month of discipline. Lines are walked, divers go down on a clear day to check the shore approaches. Every gland that can be eased and repacked is done so with the care of a watchmaker. In Boulogne, Sergeant Caron's crew has grown fluent in the language of tiny leaks. The damp baby's breath of vapor where a joint wants a quarter turn more, the sharp sweet sting of petrol when someone has nicked a hose against steel. They rehearse shutting and opening as if it were a liturgy, signal, valve, confirm, wait, observe, again and again until the cadence is in the bones. The pipelines are invisible in a way that ships can never be. There is no cinematic convoy, no white wakes arrowing through gray water, no harbor jammed with hulls. What the camera would see if a camera bothered to come is a series of unchanged things. A hut with a telephone, a shack with a gauge, a side street where a woman hangs washing and never wonders why the breeze smells faintly of paraffin. Yet at the end of this plainness lies theater of the richest kind. An armored column that does not halt at noon because the Bowsers are late. A Typhoon squadron that turns engines without a question because the Bowsers were never late. The romance here is the romance of certainty. When soldiers say later that logistics won the war, this is what they mean. Pumps that always came on, pipes that mostly held, and an undersea promise that did not rise and fall with weather. March 24th, 1945. Dungeness Pumping Station, England. The day begins like any other. Frost on the dune grass, gulls raucous as if arguing over mathematics. Inside, they bring the pressure up in steps. Zasiga, Karst. Base flow established. Erzens oid, Erzjas. Second bank online. Watch gauges at shore booster Charlie. 10. A flurry of phone calls when Boulogne reports a transient drop, settled in 3 minutes by trimming a relief valve. At 12:40, McKinnon writes the number in the log with a flat stub of pencil because the moment asks for nothing theatrical. 1,000,000. 1 million imperial gallons delivered across the channel in the last 24 hours. He draws a tiny box around it and underlines it once. On a different map, arrows converge on the Rhine. The music of Operation Plunder is already loud. Nobody here claims the pipeline put men on that river's east bank. But McKinnon knows what it means to hit the mark when the word now moves from planning to orders. By late afternoon, the pump hall feels unusually light. Hutchings comes through, hat in hand, and says only, "Good." No speech, no sweep of the arm, just that single syllable that in naval mouths means carry on. They do. The night watch comes in and takes stations. A waff pours tea, adds a stingy splash of condensed milk, and passes the mug as if it were a chalice. Out beyond the lighthouse, a tug moves like a beetle against the horizon, towing a conundrum that looks for all the world like a child's toy, absurdly earnest. The records will hold the arithmetic. 17 DUMBO lines by Christmas, repaired as needed, multiplied as weather allowed. Peak days in March, a river of petrol, kerosene, and diesel that crept beneath U-boat eyes. But the thing that will lodge in McKinnon's memory is smaller. The exact sound the hall makes when everything is running right. It is not loud. It is a balanced sound, like a chord in tune. Boulogne feels the crest the same hour. Caron's crew keeps the hoses moving with the briskness of waiters between crowded tables. A young British sapper, barely a mustache, coal dust smudged at his jawline, points at a chalkboard that someone has decorated with a lopsided cartoon elephant. "Dumbo will fly," it says, and today the joke is not defensive. A French foreman slaps the board with his cap and says, "Il vole déjà." He flies already. A string of trucks noses out of the yard and onto a road where, a season ago, the only thing that moved was wind pushing paper along empty curbs. At the last vehicle, a mechanic in a greasy coat touches a jerry can with 2 fingers like a man touching a reliquary. "Allez," he says. "Go." Night. McKinnon steps outside to cool the sweat and oil from his skin. The spotlight on the lighthouse turns the air into visible slices. He digs a thumbnail into a crack on his knuckle and wonders briefly how many hands, how many small indignities it took to make something this improbable into normal. He thinks of the August failures, the anchor's bite, the fouled screw, the conundrum crusted in barnacle mail, and of the line that snapped 29 miles out. He thinks of the chalk promise Bambi breathes and of the truth that followed. Bambi dies. Dumbo lives. There is no romance in that sentence, only a clear-eyed admission that Short was right where Long had been noble. The wind lifts and drops. The pumps hold their chord. The channel, unconsulted and untamed, carries a secret on its bed all the same. McKinnon pockets his pencil, the one he used at 12:40, and turns back inside. There is another figure to write at 18 chords, another at midnight, each one a metronome tick between England and France. Tomorrow will ask for more. Tomorrow the pipe will answer with exactly what the gauges and gaskets allow. For now, the day's numbers stand like a quiet proclamation. The sea has not stopped them, machines have not betrayed them, and 1,000,000 gallons have crossed a narrow strait without a single sailor having to look up at an approaching wing. March 23, 1945. Wesel, west bank of the Rhine. Searchlights walk the clouds like slow fingers. The river looks metallic, heavy as a weapon. Staff Sergeant Joe Kincaid, Quartermaster Corps, one hand bandaged from a slipping spanner, waits at the edge of a churned-up ferry ramp and watches engineers nose assault boats into black water. Somewhere overhead, the opening bars of Operation Plunder are being written in magnesium and tracer. Kincaid's world is smaller. A row of M25 tank transporters cooling after a hard run, a brace of GMC CC-2s lined up in the verge, and a stack of battered jerry cans that need to be full before dawn. He pulls his collar up against the damp and checks his clipboard again. 2 miles back, a temporary railhead dumps Paul wagons into a sea of drums. Farther west, beyond his sight and imagination, a hose in Boulogne has slid into a lorry's throat and given it the blood to make this night possible. 03 Bontin. Dungeness Pumping Station, Kent. Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon signs for the watch and steps into the heat. The hall wears its usual winter perfume, paraffin, hot varnish, human effort. He touches each Byron Jackson casing like a ritual, bearing temps steady, no shutter on number 3. Relief valve. Charlie set 2 notches under the red line. Bring the Dover string up 5%, slow on the boost, he says, and the throttle man answers with a 2-finger salute and a twist. On the chalkboard, the night's geometry is simple and pitiless. 17 lines, Hamel 3 X9, Hamel 2 X2, Hayes 3 X4, Hayes 2 X2, target 1 million again. The numbers will not cross a single bridge, will not kick a boat off a mud bank. They will only precisely remove excuses. 0640. Boulogne, Outer Harbor. Sergeant Emile Caron's breath ghosts in the lamplight as he kneels by the soft Chaise surf section. The trench is a half-frozen wound in the beach. He presses a palm to the coupling, no heat, no chatter, then loosens a gland a quarter turn, not because it needs it, but because men like him hate the word almost. The little hut on the quay clucks and hums. Inside, the gauge needle holds against a faint tremor in the line, the sort of shiver that says Dungeness has trimmed a relief valve or a shore booster has come online. Karen stands, slaps grit from his knees, and waves the first driver forward. The lorry eases in. The hose kisses the filler neck. The flow hisses like a kettle. 3 minutes, he says, and the red ball driver nods as if that were typical of the universe. The river takes its tithe. At Wesel, the first assault boats buck side on to the current and shove off anyway. Kincaid watches a Bren team hunker into gunnels that look too thin for the weight of war they're meant to carry. Beyond the riverbank, a line of Sherman DDs waits in a copse, canvas screens folded like awkward wings. The plan has a smell tonight. Cordite, damp cotton, and oil warmed just enough to move. Kincaid checks the time, then the pencil-scratched columns. A pair of 2.5s tramp up, springs groaning. "You boys late," he calls. The driver grins with chattering teeth. "Pipe didn't stop, Sarge. Neither did we." 9:15, Dungeness. Transient at Boulogne, 3-minute drop. The waff at the switchboard has the calm of someone who married a metronome. Acknowledged, McKinnon says. Trim Charlie a hair. Tell Boulogne to hold valves steady. No compensation on their end. He doesn't look at the graph. He hears it. The big room carries a chord, pump song, diesel counterbeat, the almost silent scrape of a pencil. When it's right, the note is whole. When it isn't, there's a pain in it, a wolf tone. This morning it is right. He lets out a breath he didn't know he was carrying. 11:20, Boulogne. Karen's crew moves the hose from lorry to lorry with waiter's grace. A young sapper from Kent, face raw from the wind, points at the chalk. Dumbo will fly on the hut wall and asks, in bad French, whether the elephant has a name. Il en a plusieurs, Caron says. He has many. Aujourd'hui, il s'appelle Pont sur le Rhin. Today, he is named Rhine Bridge. The boy laughs, then flinches as a V1 memory passes across his own eyes. Boulogne has been spared that particular grammar, but the coast still jumps at noises from the east. The hose thumps as a valve upstream opens a notch. The needle rises. Karen sets his jaw and watches for the stutter that means a coupling wants attention. It doesn't come. 13:50, between Calais and Saint-Omer, France. Rail wagons clank into a siding and exhale steam. Drums roll off flat cars with dull conversations of steel on wood. A lieutenant from the Transportation Corps slides a finger down a manifest and circles a line. Pipeline intake. Boulogne Yard. He doesn't think about Dungeness or conundrums or barnacles fat as fists. He thinks in distances, axle loads, and the burn rate of an army that will put its boots on the east bank of the Rhine before this date is a day older. An engine coughs back to life. The rails tick. Out on the road, Kincaid's convoy spits gravel and pulls for the river. 16:30. Rhine West Bank. The bridgehead is alive, an atlas redrawn in real time. Engineers have teased a Class 40 Bailey into the river's teeth and swear it will carry what the war sends. Kincaid checks his cans again, runs a hand along a hose that smells like a garage in summer, and tries not to remember anything about Hurtgen or Mortain except the parts that told him what fuel means. Across the water, a white star jerks between trees. A field kitchen rattles tin bowls. A chaplain kneels with a man whose sleeve is wet where sleeves shouldn't be. "Sarge," a corporal says, tapping his watch. Kincaid nods. "Send 'em. One for the boats, one for the trucks, one for the dozers. No empty leaves this bank." The column snakes forward, hoods shivering, exhausts stitching the dusk. 18:05, Dungeness. Pressure request from Boulogne. Hold steady into the evening run. McKinnon answers with a trimmed curve and a warning. No more than 70 bar on Hayes shore ends. He remembers BAMBI's lesson in his knuckles, the way a perfect coupling, under the wrong impulse, turns traitor. The night crew arrives early, cheeks blown red by the wind. "We'll keep her singing," the watch engineer says. McKinnon nods and lets himself taste the superstition every machine man knows. Don't praise it while it's working. He paces the length of the hall once, twice, listening. The cord holds. Du Queen Bois Hadnetzen, Boulogne. Karen leans against the jam and watches a driver from Omaha, Nebraska, the state stitched onto his jacket, cap his tank and slap the fender twice, the gesture universal and older than war. "Bon," the driver says. "French good enough." "Good," Karen corrects and smiles. The pipeline is not a marvel to this boy. It is simply today's way of not stopping. That is the precise victory men like McKinnon labor for. Not applause, not headlines, but the banality of sufficiency. The river of petrol down the hose is neither photogenic nor narratable in the way an armored breakthrough is. It is the part of the story that sounds like breathing. 22:30. Rhine East Bank. The first Sherman rumbles onto the far shore, tracks grinding cinders into the roadbed. A corporal with a crow's foot of grease on his cheek whoops once, quiets, then hurries to grab a can from a stack that seems to replenish without human agency. Kincaid knows the trick. He's written it down all day. Drums from the railhead, drums from the truck park, drums from the depot that looks like a spill of black coins against a hedgerow, the lines behind the lines, the undersea promise that has been whispering to them since morning. He tightens a cap, feels the threads catch, and hears the river slap pilings in the dark. "Keep 'em fed," he says. "We only win if wheels turn." March 24th, 1945. Sakur-Waspive. Dungeness. The logbook takes its last figure of the day in a hand that is more careful than tired. The number wears no laurels, growls in no headline. It is a practical noun. 1,000,000. McKinnon draws a tiny box around it and adds one small mark in the margin, a private glyph that means we did not steal this with luck. He hangs his headset on the hook and steps into the corridor where someone has left a tin mug of tea. It tastes like burnt tin and courage. He drinks it anyway. WW2 10. Boulogne. Wind off the channel drives ice into the gaps of things. Karen's men move slower, not from fatigue but from care. A misthreaded cap now would waste what can't be wasted. The phone rings with Dungeness on the line. The WAF's voice is sleepy but steady. "Holding you at plan. Report any stutter." "Rien à signaler," Karen says. Nothing to report. He glances at the chalk elephant and thinks, absurdly, of the first time his father let him turn a pump at a vineyard press. "Steady, steady, steady," the old man had said, forearms roped under skin. "Let the tool do the work." He looks at the hose, at the little moving world of gauge and valve, and wonders if the dead ever get to know what their sons did with their lessons. 04:45. Rhine. Dawn is a bruise. The Bailey Bridge glows flat and gray. The far bank stinks of churned mud and exhaust and relief. Kincaid rubs his hands together, blows on them, and watches a column of M4s crawl east like beetles. A chaplain with a field stubble and a coffee tin nods in passing. Somewhere behind them, a pipeline under the sea has made the word delay smaller. The river takes and gives. Tonight it has given men a way across and trucks a reason to keep going once they are. So 6, where are you? Dungeness, change of watch again. McKinnon writes 2 words on the board, small and without ceremony. Hold plan. There are other days for invention and fury. Today is a day for obedience, to pressures, to tolerances, to the hard-won habits of machines. Outside, the lighthouse sweeps its blade of light across shingles and gulls, turn it into a dance. Inside, the chord persists. In Boulogne, Caron yawns and laughs at himself and pours the last of the night's tea into a cup that remembers better days. Kincaid sits on a jerry can and lets his shoulders drop for the first time in 20 hours. He does not know the names BAMBI or DUMBO. He knows only that when he raised a hand in the dark, the hose ran. When he sent the trucks, they went. When he needed the word now, the universe did not answer later. The bridgehead grows, an ink blot becoming a map. He pockets his pencil and, as the first sun hits the river like a memory of summer, he thinks one improper thought. This is what winning sounds like. It is not the cheer. It is the steady note of machines doing exactly what they were built to do. April 3rd, 1945. Dungeness Pumping Station, Kent. The morning comes in like a fist. Wind leans against the concrete walls, and the channel throws itself at England hard enough to rattle window frames. Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon steps into the hall, and the chord is wrong. Half a note sharp, a scrape under the tone that means a bearing is thinking about running hot. He makes the circuit, hand to Byron Jackson casings, eye on the relief valves, ear tuned to the wolf note every machine man dreads. "Storm curve today," he says. "Hold haze ends under 70 bar. Hamel lines get babysat." The watch engineer grunts, already rolling a cart toward number 2 booster. You feel it in your ribs. Days like this want to turn steel brittle and gaskets sly. The log from the night shift shows 3 tiny stutters to Boulogne, recovered by trimming pressure in steps, the way you talk a skittish horse across a bridge. Boulogne, outer harbor. Sergeant Emile Caron pulls back the tarpaulin on the soft Age-Oa's shore section, and the sleet slaps his cheek like a reprimand. The surf trench is half full of angry water. A corporal in a salt-stiff coat lays his palm on the coupling and shakes his head. "Pas de chaleur," Caron says. "No heat. Good. The line will flex and scuff all day. If the gland starts to weep now, they'll be here with bandage tape and curses until midnight." The phone in the hut rings with Dungeness on the wire, the clipped waft voice as steady as a lighthouse. 2-point trim for weather, hold valves, report any chatter. "Reçu," Karen answers. Under the hut's tin roof, the gauge needle jitters and then settles, like a bird deciding the branch is safe. April 5th, 1945, Wesel-Dülmen Road, Germany. Staff Sergeant Joe Kincaid rides in the passenger seat of a GMC CCKW, clipboard braced on his thigh, each pothole jerking the pencil like Morse code. The Rhine Bridge behind them has acquired the magical quality of all impossible things that become yesterday's news. The Class 40 Bailey clatters under tanks, dozers, and a river of trucks that threaten to make the word supply sound small. Kincaid flips to the page that matters. Fuel in, fuel out, burn rate for the regiment staging on the Dortmund-Ems Canal. Somewhere far west, a hose in Boulogne never sleeps, DUMBO whispering a certainty into the coast. And inland depots and railheads turn that whisper into drums, then into the warm cough of engines that do not stall at bad moments. The war itself shifts its weight. April 6-8 brings storms that force 2 Hamel lines into sulk and failure. One sagged onto a wreck's rib and nicked its skin, another complained at a weld and split like an oath. McKinnon's crew turns into surgeons, shut, isolate, winch, cut, sleeve, weld, and the hull takes on the aftersmell of a long operation. Hot metal, wiped oil, cold tea. Hayes is a better patient. Once couplings are right, it forgives weather with a stoic shrug. By April 10th, both Hamel runs are back in the song and the cord is whole again. The board on the wall says what McKinnon likes most: hold plan. No heroics, no improvisation beyond the small daily kind. The kind where a fitter's wrist learns the exact quarter turn that stops a whisper leak without bruising the thread. April 12th, 1945, word comes down the wire that President Franklin D. Roosevelt is dead. For an hour, the pump hall is quieter than the machinery would warrant, as if the building itself knew enough to bow its head. Then the watch flips the page and writes the same numbers they would have written anyway, the way men write their names on the first day back from a funeral. McKinnon thinks, not for the first time, that the virtue he has come to prize above all others is obedience to tolerances. You can mourn and still keep 68 bar off a tender coupling. You can salute a memory and still call Boulogne to say the evening curve will be a hair lower because the storm is pushing the shore trench harder than the maps let on. April 14th, 1945, Ruhr Pocket. Kincaid's world reduces to verbs. Load, move, refuel, turn. The roads around Ham and Dortmund chew tires and punish springs. But the columns do not stop because stopping would put a kink in a bend of time nobody wants to test. He sees an entire nation's industry turned into salvage and roadblocks. He sees factories hollowed out to brick shells while the newest M4A3s nose past, exhausts snapping like flags. At a depot west of Soest, a lieutenant jokes that the fuel seems to arrive out of the ground. Kincaid grins because the joke is better than the truth and close enough to it. a hose under a tin roof in Boulogne, a pump house on shingle in Kent, and miles of pipe under the channel that do not care whether the surface heaves or rests. April 19th, 1945. Dungeness night drill. A tug noses a conundrum past the headland, the drum turning like a sleepy planet, black pipe unspooling into dark water with a hush you can hear if the wind will hush too. They're swapping out one of the 3-inch Hamel lines, scheduled, not crisis, to get ahead of the sort of failure that loves to happen at 03 Rower in a gale. Hutchings comes to the catwalk and watches in silence, cap pulled down just so. He's a man who communicates in approvals and the absence of reprimands. Tonight his hands stay behind his back. The drum pays off, the shore party hauls, the new end kisses the beach and slides into the trench, with only a short, bad-tempered wrestle at the surf line. Inside the hull, a chalk mark moves one notch and someone erases temp beside it. When it's right, good work looks like nothing at all. April 21-23, 1945, toward the Elbe. Kincaid rides shotgun again, this time in a Mack NR Fat with drums, the convoy running east past fields that are green and indifferent. The briefings say Magdeburg and Dessau. The men say simply the Elbe. Bridges, ferries, improvisations. Every approach has a fuel appetite like a new recruit has a shoe appetite. Incredible until you witness it become normal. At a crossroads choked with refugees and cattle, Kincaid hops down to hand signal a lorry through and ends up staring at a woman with a baby and a face that does not quite understand the present tense. He inventories the things in his pockets, a pencil, a stub of chocolate, a cigarette he promised himself, and feels each of them turn into still not enough. He clears the road anyway. The convoy moves. Somewhere behind them, the hose in Boulogne hisses and does not ask the river for permission. April 24-25, 1945, Boulogne and Calais. Karen's crew has learned a discipline that would make a clock envious. The turn of a valve has a cadence. The meeting of filler neck and hose has a geometry. Even the chalk on the hut wall has acquired a ritual. DUMBO will fly boxed in by small tally marks for each day without a stutter. A British sapper from Dover adds a crude cartoon bridge with a single word under it, Elbe. Karen laughs, then checks the gland again because laughter is never tightened a thread. The phone rings. The waif again, voice like good glass. Pressure step in 2 minutes. Confirm ready. Pray, Karen says, glove on the wheel. He eases the valve and the gauge agrees with the universe. Outside, gulls argue with the wind. Inside, the banality of sufficiency continues its unglamorous miracles. April 26, 1945. Dungeness. Routine can be a kind of courage. McKinnon signs for the watch and writes the day's curve where the men can see it at a glance. He puts a finger on the spot where BAMBI broke back in October and says nothing. Reminders don't need words. A fitter brings up a box of couplings from stores, each wrapped in oiled paper like a pastry. The store's clerk has perfect handwriting. It looks like a school teacher's. McKinnon finds that fact wildly comforting. War is built on millions of tiny competences, and he loves them all fiercely. The man who sets the shore booster 2 points under red and leaves it there. The driver who caps a lorry in 3 practiced motions. The girl on the switchboard who hears the difference between a line breathing and a line complaining. April 27-29, 1945, Elbe River Line. Kincaid's unit fuels everything with moving parts. Ducks nose in and out with amphibious arrogance. Bulldozers push causeways into mud that wants to be lake. Bridging companies count cord, panel, transom, and sway brace like rosary beads. In the distance, an RAF Typhoon makes a last angry pass at a pocket of diehards, and the men do not look up because the sound means somebody else is working too. The orders ride on certainty. You will be at this bend, at this hour, with this much in your tanks. That certainty rides, in part, on a pressure wave that left a disguised pump house days earlier, crossed a narrow sea, slid through a beach trench, and entered a lorry that somebody thought was just another lorry because on good days, miracles wear overalls. April 30th, 1945, Dungeness to Boulogne. The day Adolf Hitler dies in Berlin, nothing dramatic happens at the pump hall. The cord holds. A Hamel run winds a little at its bearings and is put on the list for a calm weather swap. A Hayes coupling receives its due respect and a quarter turn from a hand that knows the difference between tight and right. If there is relief, it is quiet, the kind that loosens a jawline and makes the tea taste marginally less like tin. McKinnon stands by the open door just long enough to catch a blade of lighthouse light on the shingle and thinks of August, when the channel felt like a mean animal. Today it's only water. The phone rings. Boulogne reports normal. Calais reports normal. All lines singing. "Carry on," he says. He wipes a thumb across the logbook's last figure and leaves a clean stripe in the oil. May 2 to 4, 1945. Across the front. Kincaid watches a map turn into an answer. Units he's been fueling for months are suddenly everywhere, and the miles between dots no longer feel like risks, but like the final obligations of an arithmetic problem done true. A chaplain offers him coffee he doesn't want and blessing he can't use, and Kincaid takes both because the world seems amenable to polite lies. On a siding near Lüneburg, drums roll into a yard that 2 seasons ago could barely accept a bicycle. There's a rumor everywhere, a rumor that the war in Europe is breathing its last. Kincaid touches the fender of a truck out of habit the way sailors touch a hatch, the way engineers lay hands on pump casings. Machines ask for respect and give it back in kind. May 5 to 7, 1945. Dungeness. Hutchings signs 2 memos that feel like crossing thresholds. One to authorize a standby posture on new lays unless a failure justifies the steal. One to begin planning the drawdown that will follow whatever word Whitehall chooses when the papers are signed. McKinnon pretends to grumble. Machines like to keep habits, but the truth is he feels something like gratitude. To design for continuity and then be told to plan for ending is a rare luxury in war. He takes a slow walk along the shore in a jacket that still smells faintly of paraffin and listens to a sea that for once isn't a problem to solve. May 8, 1945. VE Day. Boulogne erupts like a stadium. Karen's men chalk "DUMBO et vole" on the hut in letters too big for the wall. Someone finds a bottle. Someone else produces a harmonica whose repertoire is limited but enthusiastic. The hoses are coiled, the gauge sits square, the surf trench looks suddenly like a trivial ditch instead of a trench that once threatened to eat their work. Karen, who has always been a practical man, shakes each hand in his crew and then goes and checks the coupling once more because victory is not a reason to let a gland dry out. The phone rings. Dungeness on the line, the WAF's voice, oddly bright. "We're holding you at plan for now, Sergeant, until told otherwise." "Bien sûr," Corian says. "Of course." He hangs up and lets himself rest an elbow on the doorway and look at the sea that has been their ally despite itself. At Dungeness, McKinnon writes 2 words he has never written in this pump hall. Stand down. Not off, not abandon, not forget. Stand down. A maintenance crew will inspect every bearing and repaint every rail. A drafting table will fill with drawings that show how to detension, cap, and leave safe. But for one heartbeat, one small quiet thing in a war of loudness, the hall simply listens to itself. The tick of cooling metal, the sigh of a valve that won't be asked to hold redline again for a long time, the scraped laugh of a man who realizes he might sleep past dawn tomorrow without guilt. Inland, Kincaid sits on a jerry-can-turned shrine and lets the numbness fill him up to the brim and stop there. The bridge he helped feed will stand a while, then come down. The road he cursed will dry and crack, and grow weeds, and somebody will drive a tractor along it and not know what it once carried. He thinks of fuel as water. He thinks of the pipeline as a river that obeyed men when so many other rivers refused. The war taught him many indecencies. It taught him one decent thing too, that 1,000 quiet competences braided together can make a miracle pass for normal. Far below the channel's surface, the lines rest where they were laid. Haze curves easy as rope, Hamel straight as an order, spanning sand, gravel, and the iron archaeology of wrecks. The sea moves over them, indifferent. Above, the disguises that hid pumps as cottages will come down. The conundrums will rust at moorings or be cut for scrap, and the men who wrote numbers in pencil will take those pencils home and use them for shopping lists and children's homework. But for as long as memory can do mathematics, there will be a day circled in a log at 1240 when 1,000,000 gallons crossed a strait without a ship and made the last miles of a war shorter. May 9th, 1945. Dungeness Pumping Station, Kent. The morning is too quiet, like a theater after the audience has gone. Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon unlocks the side door, and the hall answers with soft ticks as metal cools. No chord today, no diesel counterbeat, no Byron Jackson whine, just the delicate sounds machines make when they're deciding whether to forgive you. The watch has been cut to a skeleton. A single desk lamp throws a cone of yellow on the logbook, where Stand Down looks both triumphant and vaguely disloyal. McKinnon runs his palm along the smooth curve of a pump casing and feels the ghost of heat, the memory of nights when the gauge needle rode the line like a tightrope walker. A fitter appears with a clipboard. Detentioning schedule, sir. Paper replaces pressure. For the first time in months, a number can sit still without guilt. He starts where the sea gnawed hardest. Out past the shingle, the Hamel runs lie with straight-backed honesty on the seabed, steel that never learned to forgive a sharp edge. Closer to the surf trench, the Hayes shore sections breathe easy, soft-backed and patient. The plan for the day is fussy, domestic. Bleed down a strand from Boulogne, cap a shore end, lift a section of pipe just enough to slip a blanking flange on like a ring. Men in oilskins work with the same unshowy competence they used for war tasks, only slower, the way you move in a church. The lighthouse ticks its cold light along the horizon. A gull takes issue with the wind and loses. McKinnon signs for a pallet of new gaskets. Ridiculous, he thinks, to unwrap fresh rubber on a day when nothing will go to redline, and feels a relief so private it fits behind his teeth. Boulogne Outer Harbor, France. Sergeant Emile Caron folds the tarpaulin over the soft haze and takes the habitually unnecessary step of smoothing the canvas with his glove. The hut on the quay looks suddenly small without the pump's hum to fatten the air around it. On the wall, chalk letters "DUMBO et Vole" are going pale under a film of salt. The call comes from Dungeness. No pressure now, just names. The WAF on the wire has traded dispatch for kindness. We'll be reducing to inspection cycles, Sergeant. Would you prefer we ring mornings or afternoons? Karen laughs. In his pockets are 2 scraps of paper. One is a demobilization card stamped with an impatient ink pad. The other is a list of names from Tourlaville and Calais. Dockers and drivers he wants to buy a drink for before everybody spreads to their own corners of the piece. Matin, he says. Morning. He sets the receiver down with the ceremonial care of a man leaving bread at a grave. May 12th, 1945, the Thames, London Reach. A tug noses a conundrum past moored barges, the big drum flaked with rust in a pattern that looks like maps of continents that never were. Civilians on a wharf stop and stare the way people stare at retired circus animals. Curiosity, respect, a little incredulity that such a creature ever lived among them. On the drum's rim, chalk from an old lay still clings in sheltered patches. 3 Hamel, keep way, no surge. The yard they're towing to will lift it free of the water and let men in flat caps walk inside its ribs with measuring tapes and jokes about elephants gone to pasture. A boilermaker taps the steel with a hammer and listens with his head cocked, a doctor with a stethoscope. The conundrum's answer is low and resonant. For a moment, even the boilermaker seems impressed. May 15, 1945. Dungeness. Commander J.F. Hutchings arrives with a leather folder in the eyes of a man whose sleep has become legal again. He stands with his hands behind his back and watches a pair of sappers chalk neat symbols on a pipe end as they blanket. "We will write this up so that the next engineer can do it with less luck," he says, not quite to McKinnon, not quite to the room. Luck is a poor habit. The after-action paper is thick with nouns: scour, bearing heat, shore booster discipline, coupling tolerances, and thin on adjectives. There is a section for lessons learned where August's humiliations have been turned into recipes. Scrape conundrums clean monthly, sweep surf trenches after storms, never bring highs above X under a new coupling, never bring Hamel above Y when the barometer falls. McKinnon has never loved prose, but he loves this kind. Instructions that spare some future knuckle his own scars. He walks out to the shingle with Hutchings, and the silence takes them as a wave takes a sandcastle, briskly, without apology. "Do we pull them all?" McKinnon asks, meaning the lines under the water. Hutchings considers the horizon. "Some," he says, "where steel is dear and seas are kind. Others will cap and leave. The sea will get its presents." McKinnon watches the surf break and thinks of the invisible miles where they taught the channel to carry a secret. There is a sting in leaving good work behind. There is also relief in not rehearsing arguments with wrecks and weather anymore. May 18, 1945. Wesel-Soest Road, Germany. Staff Sergeant Joe Kincaid leans against a mud-licked GMC CCKW and squints at a notice tacked to a telegraph pole. Redeployment staging, Bremen. The Pacific has a way of saying not yet to men the European war has released. He half hopes the new orders will miss him by a week. He half hopes they won't. In a depot yard, drums rattle in lines neat enough to please any quartermaster, which is to say not neat enough for Kincaid. His pencil has started to write smaller since VE Day, as if the paper demanded less proclamation. A chaplain he recognizes from the Rhine makes a pass with a tin cup of coffee, and Kincaid lets the heat sit in his hands longer than the coffee requires. "Here they had a pipeline under the sea," the chaplain says, conversational, like he's discussing rain. Kincaid shrugs. "Wouldn't surprise me." It is the truth in a joke. He has been living off a truth that sounded like a joke when someone finally said it out loud. May 24th, 1945. Boulogne. The harbor smells less of war and more of fish again. Karen stacks wooden chocks that no longer need to live under heavy hoses. A British sapper with ink on his hands, demob papers in progress, produces a camera with bellows and pleats and asks to take a photograph of the hut. "One for the wall at home," he explains. Karen nods and stands at the door, hand on the jamb as if he were pinning a metal to wood. The sapper fiddles with the shutter, makes an apologetic face, and takes the picture. In the future, that print will hang in a kitchen where the steam of soup will curl the paper and a child will ask why the man is touching a shed like it might run away. The mother will say, "Because once that shed fed tanks. Because once we needed a miracle you could trip over and not see." June 2nd, 1945. Isle of Wight. A false front comes down, plank by plank, the cottage unmasking itself as a room full of pumps. Brown paint flakes off to reveal navy gray. A signboard with nothing written on it leans against a hedgerow and looks suddenly comical. McKinnon walks through the emptied space, counting by habit, valves, flanges, gauges, even as the count no longer matters. He pockets a small brass tag stamped with a number, the sort of innocuous relic that will anchor memory better than a speech. Outside, boys on bicycles ride past and one of them shouts, "They say petrol ran through wires!" Children make sense of secrets the way children always do, with
like
metaphors
much.
the engineers envy.
But those
June
vegetables,
10th, the 15,
well, they fed the
1945.
tanks.
The drawdown. The last scheduled Hamel swap becomes a lift and store. Cranes bite the pipe with padded jaws, hoist lengths to a barge, and lower them to a yard where they will sit under tarps and gossip with rails and girders about a time when everything urgent was honest. Hay-ice sections near the beach are rolled like carpets, strapped and stacked. A diver surfaces off Boulogne with a thumbs up, teeth bright through his faceplate, a sapper on the beach log's shore trench intact, no ordnance exposed. The pencil trundles on even as the adrenaline has gone. In the evenings, the crews discover what roofs sound like in rain when nobody is awake to listen to the pumps instead. June 18th, 1945. Admiralty Annex, London. Hutchings reads the last paragraph of his report aloud to a room of men who will keep their admiration tidy. The principal merits of the system are discretion, weather independence within limits, and the implacable reliability of simple parts in disciplined sequence. Someone asks what he means by disciplined sequence. Hutchings folds his hands. A pump that holds its note. A valve that is never hurried. A coupling that is never bullied. Men who respect thresholds. He closes the folder and the room lets the words settle. History will treat the great operations like pageants. This will be filed as engineering. He is content with that. June 21st, 1945, Dungeness at night. McKinnon walks the perimeter one last time before handing the keys to a caretaker staff. The lighthouse does its slow blink. The wind herds the shingle without asking permission. He stops at the door and listens for a chord that isn't there. Hears instead the tiny domestic symphony of a building at rest. A hinge settling, a window complaining in its frame, distant gulls practicing arguments they never finish. He slides the keys across the desk and signs his name where the line asks for it. A fitter he's known since August offers a hand. They shake once, like men agreeing a job is properly done. June 25th, 1945. Boulogne. Karen turns the hut key and for the first time pockets it as his own. The city around him has begun to collect the rituals of peace. Bread queues turned into bread lines, mothers texting a new grammar into schoolyards that will have to forgive their scars. He stands on the quay with hands in his coat and tries to decide whether the sea looks friendlier now. It looks the same. That seems right. He thinks about bringing his boy here in a year to show him the trench and the place where a hose once sang. He thinks better of it and decides to bring him fishing instead. June 30th, 1945. Bremen Staging, Germany. Kincaid sits on a crate painted with stencils and numbers and watches a yard organize itself toward elsewhere. A clerk calls his name and he raises a hand. The clerk nods and waves him to a table where a corporal with a stamp looks like a conductor ready to cue an orchestra that hasn't decided what to play. "You'll ship when you ship," the corporal says, a philosopher disguised as a bureaucrat. Kincaid signs, pockets a paper, and looks back toward the road that fed the river, the bridge that became a habit, the drums that became furniture. He thinks of a hose hissing under a tin roof and without meaning to, smiles. When a sergeant from another outfit asks him what he did in the war, he says, "I kept things moving." It feels for once like a complete sentence. July 4th, 1945. Dungeness, a quiet anniversary. McKinnon returns on a whim and stands in the doorway without stepping inside. The room smells of cold iron and the trace sweetness of old paraffin, ghosts polite enough to keep their distance. He takes the pencil stub from his pocket and rolls it between thumb and forefinger. It is the same one he used to box a number at 12:40 on a March day that will never require a speech to explain itself. He thinks of BAMBI, noble, treacherous, and DUMBO, homely, obedient, and of the way machines teach morality to men. Patience over drama, discipline over daring, thresholds respected over legends improvised. He lets the pencil go back into his pocket, tips his cap to an empty hall, and walks out into wind that smells only of salt and weeds and a future broad enough to hold smaller problems. The sea keeps its old opinion. Far under the surface, capped ends wait like commas in a sentence nobody will finish. Above, in sheds and workshops, lengths of pipe lean into each other like retired athletes. In kitchens, mugs find new lives that do not involve night shifts and tin flavors. In pockets, brass tags and pencil stubs become the talismans of men trying to explain to their own hands why they keep reaching for valves that no longer need them. The undersea river is ended, but the habits it taught, the tenderness with thresholds, the trust in the small competences of strangers, will live for a long time in men who cannot hear a pumped song without also hearing the word enough. August 3rd, 1945. Admiralty Press Room, London. The room smells of ink and heat. Fans clatter, jackets come off. A civil servant with a neat mustache lifts a sheaf of papers and says a phrase that makes 3 reporters look up hard. Pipeline under the sea. The headline men had come for ships and generals. Instead, they get engineers and a riddle-turned plane. He speaks of pump houses disguised as cottages, of floating drums, conundrums that paid out steel into water, of lead-cord haze and welded Hamel lines threaded across the seabed. He does not say who scraped barnacles with a table knife in a gale, or who learned the exact quarter turn that made a coupling honest. That part never makes papers. But the idea, fuel arriving without a ship, throbbing under waves unseen, draws pencils fast. A photographer asks if there's anything to point his lens at. You may visit the Isle of Wight, the man says, or Dungeness. The machines are at rest, but they will sit for you. August 7th, 1945. Sandown, Isle of Wight. Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon stands beside a pump casing that has been polished by rags and hands into something like sculpture. A placard, fresh paint, respectful type, calls this hall part of Operation PLUTO. A pair of schoolboys in shorts shuffle past, reading aloud in the way children read when grown-ups pretend not to listen. Petrol went through a wire, one insists. Pipe, his friend corrects. The caretaker chuckles and lets them argue into understanding. McKinnon keeps his cap in his hands. He cannot decide if the room looks smaller because the noise is gone or larger because the fear is. A woman points at a wall map where BAMBI runs like a nerve to the Cotentin and DUMBO hops the Dover Strait. Which did you run? She asks. The one that worked, he says, and surprises himself hearing humor he didn't know had returned. August 15th, 1945. Boulogne, Outer Harbor, France. Sergeant Émile Caron buys a round with money that feels lighter than it should and toasts a chalk elephant that refuses to leave the hut wall even after rain and wind have argued with it. DUMBO, a volée, still there, salt-paled and stubborn. The harbor has slipped toward peacetime smells, fish, tar, bread, yet habit pulls him back to the soft haze shore trench, like a pilgrim touching a relic. He runs a hand over the capped end. Merci, he says to a thing that doesn't know language, and that's enough. A British sapper, papers in his pocket and a ship home on his horizon, asks if Karen will keep the hut. Karen shrugs. Maybe I make a storeroom. Maybe a shed for nets. He doesn't say the truth, that he cannot imagine this patch of quay without the hum that once made the world less capricious. September 2nd, 1945. Wesel, Germany. Staff Sergeant Joe Kincaid sits on a crate in late sun and opens a small envelope he's been ignoring. Adjusted service. Rating points scribbled in block letters. He has enough to go home. A buddy with fewer points reads the Pacific News, sets the paper down very carefully and says, "Maybe the ocean's had enough of us." Kincaid looks at the road and lets the hum of trucks, piecework now, not battle, settle into a smaller register. He thinks about what he'll say if anyone asks what he did in the war. There are words for fighting and for flying, for building bridges under fire.
Is that the troop ship bound for
There
home?
are fewer for keeping engines from stopping. He tries a line aloud and tests the taste of it. I kept fuel where it had to be. It holds. September 18, 1945. Dungeness, a day of salvage. A barge rides the swell while men in oilskins guide a length of 3-inch hamel up out of gray. The pipe breaks the surface with a sound like a whale clearing its throat. Winches complain, cables bite, and the section swings, drips, and settles on timbers. A rigger runs a cloth along the weld seam, squinting for hairline truths that once cost sleep.
Japan formally surrendered.
Store or scrap?
It's finished.
The yard foreman asks. Store, Hutchings answers without looking up from his clipboard. We've bought this lesson. Let's keep the book. On shore, a lorry groans under the weight and crawls toward a yard that smells of tarpaulin and quiet pride. In the hall, a junior engineer lays out couplings in oiled paper as if setting a table. Detention, blank, record, stack. The verbs of peace are small, exact, and fully sufficient. October 4th, 1945. Shingle Walk, Dungeness. The wind throws grit at ankles and pockets. The lighthouse flicks its metronome across a cleaned horizon. McKinnon walks with Hutchings and a thermos between them. They speak in the short sentences of men who have already said the long ones. We were wrong about the long line, Hutchings says at last, meaning Bambi and her heartbreak. We were right to have two plans, McKinnon replies, meaning Dumbo and the prosaic genius of choosing short over noble. The sea forgives nothing, Hutchings says. Machines forgive something, McKinnon counters, if you respect their thresholds. They stop, listening for a sound that isn't there. The silence is not empty. It is a ledger, closed cleanly. October 20th, 1945. London, a lecture hall. A slide clicks. A projected image throws a conundrum onto a white wall large enough to startle. The audience is a mixed regiment. Naval officers with tidy pens, civil engineers with notepads already full, a few journalists who came to see if there's a story left after victory. The lecturer, thin, careful voice, speaks of seabed scour and shore-end armor, of avulsions where currents tried to drag pipe like kite string, of pressure curves that must be stepped, never leapt. He points to a graph where March 1930 in der Spelt am Marsch, 1945 rises to a tight plateau, 1 in 1,000,000 imperial gallons in a day sustained. No one claps for a graph, but several men draw the shape of that plateau into their own notebooks and box it the way McKinnon once boxed a number in a hot room at 1240.
And deploy the Hamel pipeline across the channel.
Ideas can be souvenirs too. November 6th, 1945. Boulogne Market. Caron moves through stalls of onions, boots, tobacco, and improbably fragile cups, carrying a coil of rope he does not need but cannot resist. He pauses at a corner where the pipeline phone used to ring in his ear with that particular English calm. A child is drawing in chalk, houses, a cat, a boat with too many flags. Karen crouches. Fais un tuyau, he says. Draw a pipe. And the boy obliges, a thick line under his boat, connecting nothing to nothing with the authority children grant their own maps. Karen laughs and feels the laugh stick to his throat for a second. Bien, he says, standing. Good. Later he will put the coil of rope on a nail in his shed and tell himself it is for nets. It will hang there, anchor of a memory that never entirely asks for words. December 12th, 1945. A quiet office, Whitehall. Hutchings signs the last after-action memorandum with a pen that scratches lightly. The paragraphs are ungenerous to luck and lavish with sequence. Do not raise Che's shore ends beyond safe bar during first 12 hours of any restart. Scrape conundrum skins on schedule. Barnacles will impose rotational load beyond design if permitted. Hamel shore transitions require soft lengths. Accept the inefficiency to prevent surfline scuff. He adds a line he wasn't sure belonged until today. Train ears. Then beneath it, in smaller hand, a plant in tune will tell you its own truth. He considers striking it, too mystical by half, but leaves it. Some truths need their own grammar. December 24th, 1945. Somewhere over the Atlantic. On a troop ship where coffee tastes like nostalgia, Joe Kincaid leans at a rail and watches black water turn itself into torn silk. A sailor points. Harmless mischief. Pipeline down there? Maybe, Kincaid says, a smile tucked in the corner of his mouth. He makes a private inventory. A pencil stub, a creased snapshot of a Bailey Bridge at dawn, a scrawled fuel table from a night when the numbers mattered like breath. He will go home and talk about weather and baseball and the price of tires. If someone asks about the war, he will say, as practiced, I kept fuel where it had to be. If they ask how, he will say, with friends, because that is also true. January 3rd, 1946. Dungeness. The keys handed over. The caretaker slides a ledger toward McKinnon. It is neat, solicitous, and full of boxes waiting for ticks that will be made by other hands. McKinnon signs one last time and rests his palm on the paper as if confirming the page's temperature. Outside, the wind has the old habit of looking like weather to fight, but the hall has taught him which battles are real. He pockets his brass tag, nods once to the big quiet, and steps into a world that will take him back, if not to pumps and gauges, then to other machines with other thresholds. He understands now that the virtue is portable. Hold tolerance, respect sequence, let small competences add up to something that looks like luck from far away. The sea keeps its opinion. Far below, a capped haze loop lies gentle as rope. A stored length of Hamel grows a new patina under tarpaulin. A conundrum on a riverfront becomes the sort of giant that schoolboys dare each other to touch. Men scatter to jobs and tables and fields, to workshops that smell of metal without fear, to harbors where canvas covers engines that will not decide the fate of a map. What remains is quiet and stubborn, a practice of listening, a way of laying hands on iron without bullying it, an affection for numbers boxed just so on a board. When people that years hence say Pluto as if it were only a code word, a few will remember its other name. A river under the sea that turned if into when for an army in motion. February 14, 1946. Woolwich Works, London. The factory smells of hot resin and damp rope. A row of armoring machines chatter like patient monsters while a pair of engineers feed a dart cable through dies that cinch, bite, release. It isn't telegraph. It isn't quite fuel line either. It is the in-between, flexible, pressure honest, sheathed in wire against a seabed's bad manners. Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon stands with a clipboard he promised himself he wouldn't carry into civilian life and watches the line take shape. The foreman wraps the cable's skin with a mallet, listening the way good sailors listen to hulls. You ran the channel, he says, not a question. McKinnon nods. We persuaded it, he answers, and the foreman grins without looking up from his work. The machine's note is good, balanced, no wolf tone, and McKinnon feels a small, traitorous peace. The war's grammar transposed to peacetime nouns. A messenger weaves through boxes to a drafting table pinned with drawings. Soft end haze married to steel Hamel with a surfline transition that looks like a punctuation mark. A young woman in a cardigan traces the curve with a pencil, rehearsing the step pressure sequence under her breath. No leaps, she says. Never leaps. McKinnon hears Hutchings in the echo and almost turns to answer before remembering Hutchings isn't here. He is, by rumors, in a conference room writing the plainest sentences of his life. scrape drums monthly, step pressure, respect thresholds. The words sound like prayer when you say them right. March 3rd, 1946. Boulogne Outer Harbor, France. Sergeant Émile Caron, no rank now, just a man in a dark coat with a wrench he refuses to retire, leans into the old soft haze hut and breathes the faint ghost of paraffin like a memory you don't want to startle. The chalk elephant is still there, paled to a rumor. DUMBO a vole. Nets hang from pegs where heavy hose once slept between shifts. A fisherman friend, Henri, who never learned to love valves, sticks his head in. To guard ce petit hangar. You keeping this little shed? Karen shrugs. It kept us, he says. They carry a cracked wooden chest to the quay and a roll of bandage tape falls out. Salt stiff, still smelling of storm days at the surf trench. Henri reaches for it and Karen, without thinking, says, gently, the way he did 100 nights when a quarter turn meant the difference between a dry gland and a day lost. March 21st, 1946. Abadan Refinery, Persian Gulf. Heat walks like a living thing. Anglo-Iranian men point at a chart where a short seabed line snakes to an offshore berth, a proposal to spare tankers the channel's slick temper and keep crude flowing when the weather sulks. A visiting consultant with a neat mustache and a memory for haze couplings taps the drawing. You want a soft section at the shore, he says. Treat waves as language, not force. The refinery's pump hall, bigger than anything in Kent, fat with Worthington pistons and Europe's new optimism, plays a chord that makes McKinnon's hands itch for a pencil. He isn't meant to be here. Officially, he's in Basildon installing municipal pumps, but he signed a non-disclosure once and engineers keep odd promises across oceans. When the hull hits perfect tune, he smiles and the man beside him looks puzzled, then smiles too without knowing why. April 7th, 1946, Columbus, Nebraska. Staff Sergeant Joe Kincaid, just Joe now, stands under a tin overhang and watches rain dimples in a puddle turn taillights into comets. The GMC he once loved is a memory with a misplaced steering wheel. Today he guides an international harvester truck that smells of grain and hope. The Roadhouse has a fresh sign, Ethel, and a pump handle with a smoother throw than any hose coupling ever had. A kid in a Letterman jacket leans on fender and asks if the war was like the moving pictures. Joe says, sometimes, because some days were tracer fire and bayonets. When the kid asks what he did, Joe says the sentence he practiced. I kept fuel where it had to be. The kid nods like that's not heroic enough. Joe doesn't mind. Hero is a word you give to noise. He's grown fond of chords. May 18th, 1946. Dungeness Shingle. Commander J.F. Hutchings arrives hatless, hair trying to make him look younger than he is. A crane lifts a section of 3-inch hamel to a barge, while two sappers in oilskins steady it with taglines. Store it all? One asks. Hutchings almost smiles. Store what we'll teach. He hands McKinnon a thin booklet, stamped and bound with string. Pluto, post-operation notes for shore and sea parties. The table of contents is pure virtue. Conundrum maintenance, seabed scour countermeasures, shore end armor, pressure step tables, coupling inspection, visual and sonic. Sonic? McKinnon asks, flipping to the page. Train ears, Hutchings says, as if that were a line he fought to keep in. A plant in tune will tell you when it's lying. McKinnon, who has spent nights sorting truth from tremor, signs the receipt like a man accepting a family heirloom. June 9th, 1946. Cherbourg, Cotentin Peninsula. Karen takes a detour on a trip to see an aunt and finds himself on a quay that doesn't remember August well enough. He leans on a rail and watches a coaster ease from the basin with the self-importance of ships that outlived a war. A French officer notices the way his hand rests on metal like a man on a familiar shoulder. Vous étiez ici? Were you here? Karen shakes his head. Boulogne. Alors, merci. Then, because that sounds too simple for what Karen carries, the officer adds, without the undersea, we would have waited our turn on the weather. Karen laughs. We still waited, he says, and the officer grins back.
Sans regret.
The truth tastes better shared. July 1st, 1946. Woolwich Works. The foreman from February has set aside a short length of cable and a brass tag stamped with a number that means more to McKinnon than it ought. For your mantle, the foreman says, embarrassed at his own sentiment. McKinnon turns the tag in his fingers. The habit returns. Edges, weight, the way numbers talk when you touch them. He places the tag in his breast pocket where a pencil stub lives and feels for a dangerous moment like a character in a story that might have ended kinder than most. A whistle blows. Men swarm the line. The new drum, smaller than a conundrum, big enough to be a promise, turns once. The note is almost right. Wowger. McKinnon nods to the foreman, and the foreman answers with a thumb up so precise it could set a valve. July 18, 1946. Whitehall Lecture Room. Hutchings stands before a slide where someone has drawn the Dover Strait as a patient geometry problem. A hand goes up. Civilian. Curious. Wouldn't tankers have done as well?
As you can see on the map,
Hutchings weighs the honest answers. Often, yes. Sometimes no. And chooses the one that won't turn the room into a debate about the weather. Pluto did not replace ships, he says. It removed excuses. He shows a graph with March 1945 boxed, 1,000 imperial gallons in 24 hours, then flips to photographs of pump houses wearing cottages. Laughter softens the air. He skips the slide that shows August's fouled drum in the torn line at 29 miles. He doesn't hide the failure. He simply lets the lesson speak in the step pressure tables that prevented its encore. August 30th, 1946. Dieppe Road, Normandy coast. Karen pedals a bicycle past hedgerows that have forgiven the war by turning back into shade. He carries a coil of rope across the handlebars because old habits refuse to die neat deaths. At a bluff overlooking a beach, he stops and listens to a sea that sounds like work when you know what to hear. The wind snatches the edge of a newspaper from a passerby's hands. Plan, marshal it says in letters that make men in markets stand taller. Karen thinks of rivers under seas and money under promises and decides he will keep the hut after all. Not as a shrine, not as a museum, as a place to store things that are useful because they don't ask to be admired. September 22nd, 1946. Basildon Pumping Station, Essex. The room is smaller than Dungeness. The equipment is humbler. Centrifugal pumps with sensible appetites, a pair of relief valves so calm they look like furniture. McKinnon stands with a young fitter who keeps glancing at the clock like the machine might take offense at being watched. You'll hear it, McKinnon says, and the fitter nods, not believing him yet. They bring the system up in steps. 10%, 20, a breath, 30, pause, 40. The pipes settle on their brackets. The note clears. Something inside the casing sings true. The fitter's eyebrows move just a little. There, McKinnon says softly. That's your truth. Keep it. The boy smiles without meaning to and writes nothing down, because a man only writes down what he fears he'll forget. Night finds them both at the door, mugs cooling in hands. A moth worries a window. Somewhere, far off, a train pulls against weight it was designed to bear. McKinnon thinks of BAMBI and DUMBO, of Byron Jackson casings warm under his palm, of conundrums turning like planets and a chalk elephant that survived the weather. He thinks of Joe Kincaid without knowing his name, and of men who learned to call certainty by its quiet nickname, enough. The war is an atlas closed and shelved. The blueprints remain open, on tables, in pockets, in the practiced hands that still refuse to bully a thread when a quarter turn will do. October 12th, 1946. Basildon Pumping Station, Essex. Rain walks sideways across the yard and hammers a corrugated roof until the sound becomes a single, steady color. Captain Arthur Mac McKinnon. Only Mr. Ackery on his new badge leans over a manifold where chalk marks still remember last week's pressure steps. The young fitter from September has stopped checking the clock. He checks the note instead the way McKinnon taught him. Bring the system up in measured tens. Hold, listen. Another 10, hold, listen. The pipe greets the morning with a clean tone that has nothing to do with war and everything to do with obedience to thresholds. That's right, McKinnon says, because praise should be accurate. He draws a box around 48 on the slate, 48 psi at the far standpipe, perfect for a town that will notice only that taps run and boilers don't sulk. A van rattles in the gravel and coughs out two men carrying rolled drawings. They aren't from the council. Their coats are too good and their questions too quick for sewage and sprinklers. Provisional study, one says. Fuel corridors from the coast to inland depots. Weatherproof, interruption-proof. The other doesn't say Marshall Plan, but the shape of the thought is there. Dollars, rails, pipes, the quiet plumbing of peace. We read your post-operation notes, he adds, touching the bound copy that lives on McKinnon's desk like a hymn book. We'd like your ear for plant, McKinnon laughs. It's cheaper than instruments, he says, and the men smile the way people smile when a joke is useful. They unroll a map and the room becomes the channel again in miniature. Only this time the lines cross land. Humber to the Midlands, Bristol east toward the new refineries. Branch spurs to airfields the war has left behind like seedbeds. The draftsman's pencil hesitates at every river and railway as if asking permission. You'll want soft sections at the crossings, McKinnon says, tapping the paper where a flood will try to bully pipe. Treat water as language, not force. He draws a little ladder by the word booster and writes step. Wait, step in the margin. The men make notes with a neatness that reassures him. This is the grammar he knows. Not slogans, not speeches. Sequence, November 6th, 1946. Boulogne Outer Harbor, France. Sergeant Émile Caron, playing Émile in his peacoat, arrives with a toolbox because old habits can be heavy. The hut door sticks, then yields with the sound of a shelf that has decided to forgive its load. Inside, the air has settled into timber and faint paraffin, the ghost of a cord that once ran 24 hours and never demanded applause. The chalk elephant, DUMBO Avole, has faded to pale bone. Émile sets his tools on the bench and listens to a silence that isn't empty so much as unemployed. The harbor master wants the shore trench marked on a new plan in case someone decides to dredge with more enthusiasm than sense. We will keep the cap, the man says, tapping the plug on the soft haze end with the back of a knuckle like a priest testing an altar. A gale bursts through the door and shoves rain across the floor in a braided rope. Émile and a young docker shove the door shut together and grin in the shared stupidity of battling weather with elbows. The kid eyes the old bandage tape roll on the shelf. C'est quoi? What's that? A spell, Émile says, and tears off a strip to show him the wrap. Flat, smooth, never half-hearted, a quarter turn on the gland only when the thread asks for it. The kid nods as if learning a magic trick. You'll make a fisherman yet, Émile says, which is French for listen to things. December 1st, 1946, Columbus, Nebraska. On the forecourt of a two-pump station, Joe Kincaid wipes frost from a glass cylinder and watches pale gasoline rise with the slow confidence of a good decision. He has put his quarter-sheet fuel tables in a drawer, for sentiment, not reference. But the arithmetic still lives behind his eyes. Inflow, burn, margin, the difference between maybe and yes. A farmer in a hat older than some wars climbs down from a pickup whose tires carry more fence posts than rubber. "Heard you were quartermaster," the farmer says, meaning it as a compliment and a condolence. Joe nods, reaches for the nozzle, and hears the same tiny hiss he heard in Boulogne without ever having heard Boulogne's surf. "She'll take it," he says. The farmer grins. Never doubted it. Joe doesn't say how many machines taught him not to doubt, only to verify. Inside, he keeps a pencil stub by the cash drawer, an artifact from a night when 1,000,000 gallons became a figure and not a prayer. He writes numbers like a man who likes the look of them boxed. People ask whether he plans to move. Big city, new company, the rumored pipeline jobs that will thread states into a grid. He says he's listening. It's true. He has learned to recognize the sound a chance makes when it isn't a mistake. January 15, 1947, Institution of Civil Engineers, London. A slide clicks. On the screen, a photograph of a conundrum fills the hall with a circle so large it looks theatrical. McKinnon sits in the third row while Commander J.F. Hutchings, new suit, same stance, delivers sentences with the clean joints of a Bailey bridge, barnacle load, seabed scour, shore end armor, pressure step tables. A hand goes up from a municipal man worried about budgets. Isn't all this overkill for peacetime? Hutchings considers the word overkill, which knows a lot about the war and nothing about gaskets. Overkill is cheap compared to rework, he says. We were not brave, we were precise. I recommend precision to you. He changes slides. March 1945, the rectangle around 1,000,000 in a day. Then another image, almost comic, a pump house wearing a cottage. Laughter skims the room and lands softly, the way respect sometimes does when it is done laughing. In the corridor afterward, an engineer with ink on his fingers asks McKinnon whether Hayes really forgives weather. It forgives poor temper, McKinnon says, not poor practice. He taps the booklet under his arm, Pluto, post-operation notes, and thinks of how many verbs in it are small, scrape, listen, step, wait, check. The man nods and pockets a copy as if it were a lucky coin. February 4th, 1947. Boulogne Market. Emile threads the crowd with a coil of rope, always rope, over one shoulder. A woman selling onions complains about ice that breaks scales and hands in the same morning. Across the square, a municipal crew digs to lay a new line for water. The foreman swears at an unexpected brick culvert nobody remembers approving. The city tastes its own archaeology. Emile stops at the hut to drop off varnish for the door. He runs his hand over the capped end one more time and hears nothing, then hears himself hearing, train ears do not retire on schedule. He smiles, a little ashamed of his superstition, and leaves the varnish with a note. Pour le prochain, respect les quarts de tour. For the next fellow, respect quarter turns. March 9th, 1947. Basildon. The council's men arrive with the kind of urgency that usually means a flooded cellar has made someone important late for dinner. A storage tank's level gauge lies, and the pumps want to cavitate like men about to explain themselves to a superior. McKinnon's fitter, now the sort who gets trusted without a memo, walks the line with the back of a knuckle in the old liturgy. Feel, listen, look. He throttles a valve a hair, bleeds air at a high point that should never have collected it, and the note comes back like a friend who only stepped outside for air. The men from the council look relieved in the universal language of not having to write letters. How did you know? One asks. Heard it lying, the fitter says, and McKinnon pretends not to glow. April 2nd, 1947, Antwerp quays. A civil planning team unrolls maps in a shed that smells of wet rope and coffee. They speak of ring mains and inland depots, of rails that need friends and tankers that need alternatives. In the middle of the table sits a dog-eared copy of Hutchings' report like a relic that accidentally wandered into a secular office. A Belgian engineer taps a finger where a line would leap a canal.
Oha East.
Step up here, he says. Shore booster by the old grain silo. A Dutch colleague pencils soft section at the crossing and says, "Haze," like a word he's always owned. This is how secrets end properly, McKinnon thinks from his seat in the corner. They become standards, May 10th, 1947, Columbus, Nebraska. Joe stands in the service bay and listens to a customer explain a cough in an engine that doesn't quite want to idle. He hears the lie the carburetor is telling, too much air, not enough patience, and trims the idle screw like a man adjusting a relief valve. The cough clears. "How'd you know?" the customer asks, as if waiting for a mystical phrase. Joe points at his ear and the old pencil stub behind it. "Same way as everyone," he says. "You pay attention." He doesn't describe a pipeline under a sea or a Bailey Bridge at dawn or a hose that hissed like a kettle on a night a river changed sides. He doesn't need to. The habit is the story. June 1st, 1947, Dungeness. McKinnon unlocks the door to an empty hall because he has promised a group of apprentices a look at where practice came from. Dust hangs like punctuation in the light. He lays the brass tag on a casing and tells the story he can tell. Of BAMBI and noble distances that didn't forgive arrogance. Of DUMBO and ungainly wisdom that did. Of scraping conundrums, stepping pressure, respecting surf lines, tending glands with tape and patience. He does not pretend that pumps win wars. He says that certainty moves armies. The boys, haircuts trying to be serious, run hands along rails and make promises they don't know they're making yet. He leaves them to it and stands outside where the wind does what it wants. He has learned to call that acceptable risk. June 21st, 1947, Boulogne at dusk. Emile locks the hut and pockets the key. A boy he doesn't know skate runs along the quay and skids to a stop, cheeks loud with summer. "Monsieur, is it true petrol ran under the sea?" Emile thinks about how to answer without making it a trick. "Yes," he says, "but also patience. Patience ran under the sea." The boy frowns, then nods like someone filing a fact for later when it will suddenly make sense. Emile watches him go, and for the first time in months, doesn't feel the itch to check the cap on the soft haze. The habit is still there. The anxiety can rest. July 4th, 1947. Basildon, night shift. The fitter, his fitter now, walks the room alone and hears the plant tell him its truth. The note is round, the bearing heat is honest, the reliefs are 2 ticks under red where they belong. He writes, "Hold plan" on the slate because that is finally the point. Not emergency, not theater, not improvisation gilded as genius. Plan. Held. He kills the lights and the place ticks itself cooler, a house unlearning day. Outside, a moth throws itself at a lamp with doomed sincerity, and the night air smells of damp brick, not paraffin. He pockets his pencil stub and locks the door. Across water and fields and roads and years, 4 people sleep. A man who kept pumps singing, a man who turned lessons into sentences, a man who learned that enough is a victory worth choosing, and a man who still lifts a hand to a coupling that no longer needs it. The sea keeps its ancient opinion. Engineers keep the habit. Hear the note. Respect the threshold. Let small competences add up to a thing that looks like luck from far away and like certainty up close. June 6th, 1948. Dungeness Shingle. Kent. Wind combs the grasses and sets the lighthouse to its patient blink. The hall is open by arrangement, 1 day only, and a hand-lettered sign leans against the door. Visitors welcome, mind the steps. Arthur, Mac McKinnon, now Mr. Jacquemajor, on invoices and Mac to apprentices, stands beside a quiet Byron Jackson casing and lets a dozen people measure it with their eyes. A boy in a school blazer asks whether petrol really ran under the sea. "It did," Mac says, quietly. The boy leans closer, as if quietness were the trick. A caretaker points to a wall map where a thin red line once named BAMBI and a stouter hop across the Dover Strait marked DUMBO. The map has faded to tea stain and fingerprint. The lines remain. Outside, the channel presses its argument against shingle in a language Mac understands. Push, pull, relent. He takes a small group to the catwalk and taps the brass plates with knuckles that have learned to heal. We brought plants up in steps, he says, drawing a staircase in the air, and we listened for lies. That was the whole art. A man at the back, watch chain municipal pin, asks what made the long line fail. Pride, Max says, then softens it. Distance, couplings, seabed edges. The sea doesn't forgive long bets. He turns a valve a fraction because his fingers still like to remember. The machine answers with nothing at all, which is the correct reply when you are only telling a story. August 11th, 1948, Boulogne Outer Harbor, France. The hut's door sticks, then yields with a sigh. Émile Caron steps inside and stands for a moment without moving, the way one does in a church one has not visited in a long time. The soft haze end sleeps under a tarpaulin. The bandage tape on the shelf has gone brittle at the edges, but still smells faintly of war days, salt and paraffin and human stubbornness. He runs a gloved finger along the cap and feels grit, not corrosion. Toujours, he says to nobody. Always. A young engineer from the city's waterworks arrives with plans under his arm and questions he has taught himself to keep neutral. Monsieur Caron, we're surveying utilities along the quay. Anything we must not disturb? Karen taps the cap with the back of his knuckle. This, he says, treat it as a sleeping dog. Mark it, walk around it, and don't wake it for curiosity. At low tide, rusted iron ribs of some ancient wreck grin up like bad teeth beyond the surf line, the sort of thing that once argued loudly with Hamel. Emile kneels by the trench and shows the engineer how the sand marries and unmarries the shore end with seasons. If you ever lay a new line, he says, give the water softness to talk to. The engineer writes Croy's shore section in a neat civilian hand and underlines it. A gull laughs and gets the last word. November 2nd, 1948. Columbus, Nebraska. Joe Kincaid counts change into a drawer and boxes 2 numbers on a ledger because it pleases him. Gallons delivered, gallons sold. The forecourt has acquired new noises, radios playing dance bands, tires hissing on cold mornings. He steps outside to the pump and watches pale fuel climb the glass with the patient certainty of a man who knows the difference between maybe and yes. A trucker asks if the new pipeline jobs back east are worth the move. Joe considers the question with the engineer's modesty he'd learned by accident. Pipes are honest work, he says. You treat pressure like weather. You can dress for it. You don't argue with it. The trucker nods, digests the metaphor, and laughs. You quartermaster boys talk like preachers, he says. Joe doesn't argue. He has learned that sermons can be delivered with wrenches. March 15th, 1949. Institution of Mechanical Engineers, London. Commander J.F. Hutchings clears his throat once and begins, a pointer steady in his hand. On the screen, a conundrum fills the wall like a diagram of a planet. He does not sell legend, he sells sequence, slide, barnacle loading, the way rough skins stalled a drum and taught humility in August 44. Slide, seabed scour, and the trick of anchoring shore ends where currents only nag. Slide, the pressure step table that carried a day in March 45 to 1,000 imperial gallons without a single coupling turning trader. A civil man in the second row, pockets crammed with rulers, asks whether such caution is necessary now that peace has returned. Caution is cheaper than rework, Hutchings says. Courage is easy, tolerances are hard. You'll need both. After, in the corridor that smells of damp wool and ink, Mac waits with a folded note he isn't sure he should deliver. When Hutchings approaches, Mac hands him the slip anyway. Basildon apprentices could use an afternoon on ears. Hutchings reads, flicks a glance that might be a smile, and says, "Send them on a day the wind is wrong. Plants are better teachers when they are in a mood." June 6, 1949, Sandown, Isle of Wight. The seaside town dresses itself in bunting and memory. A small Pluto display sits under a canvas awning, photographs of pump houses wearing cottages. A short length of armored cable cut to show lead heart and wire ribs, a brass coupling polished to a proof of concept. Children take turns lifting the coupling and frown at its surprising weight. Mac explains that weight, in this case, was a virtue. A pipeline wants to lie down and stay down where the sea can't bully it. A man who did his war in a cockpit touches the cable with 2 fingertips and says, "We always think we did the dramatic parts." Mac smiles. "You did," he says. "We worked to keep it from needing drama." He leads a handful of visitors to the old pump hall. Someone has set a new placard about BAMBI, long, noble, vexed, and DUMBO, short, homely, obedient. The card is polite about failure, the engine room less so. You can still feel where August put its teeth in the nerves of men who had to come back the next day and try again. February 1st, 1950. Boulogne, a winter inspection. Emile Caron and a harbor works foreman walk the quay with a laborer's lamp and a surveyor's tape while sleet frets at their collars. The cap at the Hayes shore end is sound. The trench, after a storm, has slumped toward the sea as it always does. They mark it again on the new chart that will follow cranes, dredges, and the small ambitions of peace. A boy with a school satchel stops, eyes big. "Monsieur, is it true there is a pipe to England?" "True," Emile says, "and a habit to go with it." The boy lets habit go by him. He wants the romance. Emile gives him a smaller, truer magic. He lays the boy's hand on the cap and says, "Listen." The boy hears nothing and looks disappointed. Then he hears himself listening and smiles. It will do. April 23rd, 1950. Basildon Pumping Station, Essex. Mac has his apprentices in a semicircle around a humming centrifugal and a chalkboard that remembers the war's mathematics even when nobody names it. The youngest has a gift. He can hear the burr of a bearing cooling into a lie. "There," Mac says, as the boy flinches half a second before the needle shivers. "That." He chalks step, wait, step, because steps are how men do difficult things without drama. Plants, he tells them, are like rivers. Respect the banks and the current, and you can get things across that look impossible from the hill. One of the apprentices grins and asks if the channel really counts as a river. Mac points at the map. 2 shores, a bed, a flow. "If it moves and argues," he says, "it's a river. We persuaded one once." He lets them linger at the casing to memorize the note of enough, neither starved nor sulking, a chord in tune. Outside, rain finds the tin roof and hammers patience into it. September 12th, 1950, Columbus, Nebraska. Joe moves a hose from a truck to a tractor and back again, the motion simple and complete. He's learned to spot a burn rate that will strand a farmer at the wrong fence line. He ticks off jerry cans with the same practiced hand he once used on the Wessel Bank when a river was a border instead of a problem to solve. A salesman in a wide tie unfolds brochures for a small pipeline out toward a grain elevator. Joe runs a thumb along the paper as if feeling for burrs you cannot print. "Soft sections at crossings," he says. "Step up at the booster. Don't bully your couplings." The salesman blinks. "You in the trade?" Joe smiles. "Enough to respect it." May 6th, 1951. Dungeness at dawn. Mac walks the shingle with a brass tag in his pocket and weather in his knees. The sea works at the shore with the same old grammar: push, pull, relent. Far out, a tug noses a barge and makes its own punctuation on the horizon. He stops at the pump hall door and does not go in. You can visit a place too often and turn it into a museum of your own making. He stands instead in the lee of the wall and listens. The building is at rest and speaks in little domestic creaks. Wood easing, glass complaining in metal, a hinge arguing with age. Mac knows men who cannot bear the absence of noise after a war. He takes it as payment earned, quiet bought by sequence. He finds in the pocket with the tag the old pencil stub he boxed a number with at 12:40 on a day that did not need a speech. He twirls it and laughs at himself. Superstitions are tolerances for people. June 20th, 1951. Admiralty Annex, London. Hutchings signs the last of his formal letters on Pluto and tucks the file into the drawer where a different war will someday borrow it and pretend it invented pressure steps and shore softness. He scrawls a note to himself, write plain, train ears, respect thresholds, and leaves it under a paperweight in the shape of a ship no bigger than a matchbox. On his way out, he passes a notice board where a lecture series advertises undersea cables, new materials. He allows himself a private, uncharitable thought, welcome to the old road, and then softens it. Every craft renews itself by renaming what it already knows. November 1st, 1951. Boulogne, night water. Emile stands at the quay and feels for the cap in the dark the way a man touches his own front door before bed. The wind is in a forgiving mood. He rocks on his heels and decides he will teach his grandson the quarter-turn rule the day the boy is tall enough to reach a gland without climbing. He starts home, shoes ticking on stone. Behind him, the sea goes on with its ancient conversation. Under it, capped haze lies soft as rope. Somewhere in a yard, stored Hamel leans into other steel and gossips about whether it will never have to see again. What remains is not a shrine and not a secret. It is a habit. Hear the note, step the pressure, respect the soft where hard would break. Let small competences add up until it quietly becomes when. You can stand on a quay in France, or a shingle in Kent, or a concrete forecourt in Nebraska, and know that truth without naming it. The sea keeps its old opinion. Men keep the cord.